Thank you to Sitka Salmon Shares for that video message. And thank you all for joining us tonight for Cooking with the Cap Times with Chef Elena Terry of Wild Bearies. I'm Chelsea DeCane-Jarabic, the Cap Times Marketing and Social Media Director. I'll pass it off to our food editor, Lindsay Christians, in a sec. But first, I want to thank our sponsors for making this video event series possible. Our presenting sponsor is Sitka Salmon Shares, the video you just saw. If you use the code COOKWITHCAP, you'll get $25 off the first month of a premium Sitka seafood share. Learn more about their values and fishermen at sitkasalmonshares.com. We will drop this code and link into the chat. Our official kitchen sponsor where we are this evening is Kessenich. For over 90 years, Kessenich has provided Madison and Dane County with quality products and outstanding customer service. Stop by their showroom to shop like a chef because they're always open to the public. You can visit kessenich.com for more info. And finally, our official beverage is Owl's Brew Hard Tea Seltzer. You'll see some of that here. Fresh brewed tea blends flavored with real fruit and botanicals. We hope you've got some Owl's Brew to enjoy tonight while watching the event, but we're also going to give away a few 12-packs to lucky viewers. There's an entry link that we'll drop in the chat for a drawing that we'll do after this demonstration is over. Click the link to enter, and you must be 21 or over to win. A quick plug that if you post any pictures while you're cooking along tonight or just watching on social media, please tag the Cap Times on Instagram and Twitter. We would love to see them. And I also want to thank any Cap Times members for joining us tonight and for your continued support of local journalism and our newsroom. If you're not a member, you can become one at membership.captimes.com. We will also post that link into the chat. And without further ado, I will now pass it off to Lindsay, who is one of Wisconsin's foremost food writers and critics. Enjoy the event, everyone. And thank you, Chef. Thank you, Lindsay.
So I am obviously in my home tonight. I had an exposure earlier this week, and even though I'm vaccinated, this seems like the best move for everyone's safety. We're also doing this without an audience tonight. So, but we're really hoping that we can resume some in-person stuff once we get over this next hump. I don't know, I guess we'll see. But I'm so delighted that Elena Terry is with us tonight. I'm going to post the link to the recipe right now, just so we can all be on the same page. Elena is the founder of Wild Bearies. She's an incredible chef. She's a great educator. And I'm going to sort of turn it over to her now to introduce herself a little bit more, and then we can get started cooking.
All right. Well, hello. Good evening. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Thank you for this beautiful space and for joining us tonight. Yes, my name is Elena Terry. I'm the executive chef and founder of Wild Bearies, which is a nonprofit community outreach catering company, but we do a lot more than that. We have growers, we have an agricultural component, and it really is about bringing people together in our community through the beauty of food, and more specifically, our indigenous food. So I am a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation and have been a traditional and ceremonial cook for as long as I can remember. But I kind of made this transition and decided not to keep living in two separate worlds, and trusting that if I really dedicated my energy into learning more about our foods and honoring the flavors and pureness of what we can get off the land or cultivate in our traditional ways, that the meals that we share would be healing and nourishing and just really about building community. So I also have partnerships with the Intertribal Agriculture Council and the American Indian Foods Program and the UW-Madison, which is one of my favorites, because really what we do is for the next generation. When it comes to education or knowledge keeping, knowledge sharing, it's so that the future generations will have what we have, and hopefully through some mentorship programs and through the knowledge sharing, we'll be able to provide more of that for them. So I always appreciate the space and the time that we have to help share that education. So I was thinking about the weather and how warm it is, and everybody's kind of wrapping up summer activities. And I didn't want to make something that was really heavy with you guys, but I also wanted to honor some of the flavors of the harvest that we have right now and the uniqueness of this time where we're able to get some of those things. So one of the things, and if you look at the recipes, and I know it was something that Lindsay and I had talked about, is this incredible flavor of cedar that we use. And it's a tree that is all around us, especially here in Wisconsin. And I actually just went outside and picked these and washed them earlier today so that you could see that this is really how we use it. And I dry a lot of it because sometimes it's a little bit better to use a dried cedar. Here's one here. So I always have a jar like this with me because it's such a good flavor. It's like earthy and deep, and it's a perfect complement to red meat, and especially game meat. So we have some cedar.
Do you dry it by like hanging it up?
Yeah, or a dehydrator.
Okay, yeah.
You can do it either way. So yeah, I just really set mine out like in the kitchen by a window, and it doesn't take very long. It is a little bit different because here with the fresh cedar, obviously you're going to have a little bit more oils, which is a perfect time to chop it up and add it to your salt, because the salt just sucks in all the oil and flavors it wonderfully. And it's a great way to use less salt. So you do want to add that complement to bring out the flavors, but you don't want to do it with a heavy hand. And so adding something like cedar to your salt will make that flavor go a lot farther, and it'll give it a lot deeper of a component when you use it. So today we have, and unfortunately I thought for sure I would be able to find delicata squash, but I couldn't find it anywhere. I called I don't know how many different places and farmers even to see if they had any ready, but it seems like it's a couple weeks away for us here in this area. So I'm substituting with acorn squash instead of delicata, which is still a delicious squash, and it's kind of sweet and complimentary. We have some braised bison we're making, and then arepas and the squash. It'll be wonderful. So the first thing that I want to do is start my arepa dough because I want it to rest. And arepas are, it's like a cornbread without any flour. So this is a wonderful thing to use, and it's got incredible flavor, especially if you're gluten-free. And it's really simple, so I wanted to show you how. I have some, just some regular masa here, and then I added a little bit of my friend makes this fire roasted white corn, and it's the Longhouse hominy. And so I added a little bit of that to it because it'll give it a different depth of flavor. But you of course could use any kind of ground corn that you'd like to. And then to give it a little bit more color and just a slight sweeter flavor, I'm going to add some dried squash blossoms that my friend from Bend, Oregon at Sakari Farm sends me, which is incredible because the male squash blossoms aren't really used, and so you can pick them and harvest them and dry them, and then they're a great like finisher, but they also add a little bit of color, texture, and flavor to something like this that you might be, just solely corn flavored. So I'm just going to break some of that up and mix it up. And then it's really adding some warm water to this and stirring it and getting it to a nice consistency. And you'll be able to see how this kind of comes together really well.
So is it warm? Oh, it looks like there's a little steam coming out of it. Is it warm or like lukewarm?
It's not boiling, it's just warm. And you kind of want that to help wake the corn up and to have it start blooming, because it's just really going to hold itself together here. And I want to add just a tiny little bit of that smoked salt because, like I said, it's just the corn flavor that you're going to get, and that salt's going to bring out the squash blossoms and that fire roasted corn that I added. So this was a little bit more than 2 cups total because it was 2 cups of the masa and then a 1/4 cup of the fire roasted corn. And I'm just going to mix this. I'll show you what the end result for for the dough is going to be. And we do want this to rest a little bit. Like I said, that warmish water is going to wake up the corn, and it'll start holding together. You can kind of see how it's turning into a dough. That's what you want from this. And it smells delicious already. Like, I can smell that roasted corn in here. And it holds together really well, so it didn't take very long. Add a little bit more for that underneath.
Oh, Elena, there's a good question in the chat. Can you use masa harina instead of masa arepa?
Let me see what I have. You kind of want to use the one that you would use for like a tamale dough, because it is going to stick together, but you're not adding the fat to this one. So if it is something that is too grainy, it won't stay together as well. So you need a fine grain. That's why I only used a little bit of the little bit more coarse grain corn to go with that. But you can find that masa seca at almost any grocery store. And it is pretty economical too. So this is what we want our dough to look like. You can kind of see that it holds its shape, and it's still soft, but it isn't too soft. It's not soupy. So we want to just kind of form that and let it rest for a little bit, and we'll go back to that. Let me move this off here. So I'm using the induction burner so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better, but so the next thing that I want to do is get my beans ready to go. I brought some of these dried beans, and I love using dried beans because I know what's in them. Like, I control what I put in the beans when you start with a dried bean. And I used today these black turtle beans and some white beans that were grown for me at Dream of Wild Health. And the key to this is soaking it. And there's a lot of debate about dry beans, but I've found that not salting the water when you soak it, or when you like what I like to do is put it in a pot, bring it to a boil, cover it, and then let it soak and transfer it overnight, especially if I'm going to use them the next day. Otherwise, you can always just put water on your dried beans and then put it in the refrigerator and let it sit, and it can sit for a couple days like that. But you really want it to penetrate the bean and be ready to not have to, you don't want it really firm for these. This is the baked bean. So these are beans that I've soaked. And to go along with our bison theme here, I am going to add these, or to these, we're going to use maple syrup. And I want to make sure I printed out the recipe, so I was following what I told you guys to do also. So sorry if I'm shuffling them a little bit. Otherwise, I might end up way off of there.
Yeah, so Elena, I would love if you talked a little bit about those beans and where they come from.
These black turtle beans, or just in general?
I mean, I think it's tepary beans in the recipe, but I don't know if they're the same.
Yeah, so it really is any dried bean that you can use. I generally do use tepary beans that come from Ramona Farms, which is one of the producers in the American Indian Foods Program. And they're just beautiful, and they come in black, brown, and white. And they're absolutely delicious, and they kind of hold their shape a little bit more. But I used, for this recipe, black turtle beans, just to show that you can really use any bean in this recipe. And it's about like the bean having a base and then adding these delicious flavors to it. So sometimes it's a little hard to get a hold of, and I don't want, one of the things that I've found is that there's a lot of intimidation in trying to access some of the ingredients, or the flavors are a little unfamiliar. So being able to know that you can substitute some of those things out is always beneficial as well. So sticking with what we were talking about, I have some ground bison here, which is really an incredibly lean meat. I mean, it's absolutely delicious, and if you've had bison, then you know that it's similar, but it's completely unique from beef. And the flavor, it's not something that you can duplicate. I'd always say to try it if you can, instead of always using beef. It's one of our favorite red meats, actually, and we have it as much as we can at home. Whew. Let me get that out of there. So I am going to get this going in the pan and just get it start to be browned. It's not going to have a lot of excess fat that comes off from it when we're cooking it. So I want to be mindful while we're getting ready to add some of these other components, which are the onion and some garlic. Sorry, I just have to turn this up a little bit.
It's a little tricky, right?
Yeah. So you can really cut the onion up for this however you'd like. Sometimes I like it a little bit larger chunks, but sometimes you have people that don't like a larger chunk of onion, so it's fine to dice it. It's really that we're going to put it in the pan with this bison just to wake up the flavors and get it ready to go in the beans, and we'll put those in the oven to warm up and to finish cooking. Although these beans are beautiful, these turtle beans won't take too much extra to cook. So let me turn this up, and then I'll slice the onion. So another interesting thing is, when I was thinking about this meal, we have the corn with the arepas, we have beans, and we have squash, which are the three sisters, and they're the perfect growing combination. And I wanted to kind of honor that, especially because it is coming up to harvest time, and people that might think, I love that there were a lot of people who started gardens because of the situation that we're in right now, and continue to with them, like that we're successful. Because sometimes, I mean, even for me, that's pretty intimidating. I have people that grow for me, and I have my gardens that I focus on a small scale, but I definitely have only a few things that I grow there. And so seeing all these wonderful gardens and stuff on Facebook and Instagram just flourishing, I can't even tell you how happy that makes my heart feel. Like, whatever you're doing, it's learning those skills and reconnecting to the land, which is one of the things that we really focus on, is the healing and the connection that you have with the land when you do stuff like that, being outside. All right, it's starting to go a little bit. So I'll add the onion.
Elena, you do a lot with seed saving. And there was a really beautiful piece in the Edible Madison earlier this year, and I'm going to share a link to it in the chat, just because you talk about how, seed work is slow work. Yes. And there are a lot of times when you're trying to cultivate a new variety of something or bring something back, and it's not as easy as it seems, and it takes a very long time.
Yeah, even with something like these beans, or I didn't bring it today, but there are a few varieties of our ancestral squash that I have being grown out from growers at certain farms, and it's something that I have to plan, a year or two ahead of time, just to get the seeds to grow on a level that I would be able to share it with the community at. So it definitely is slow work. I don't think people quite understand unless they're growers and they know how incredibly slow it is, or how we really have to plan ahead, because there's always going to be these environmental factors that could affect the grow, or the seed supply, or how much we're able to share with the community, because we always have to make sure that we have enough of the seeds to continue on. But it also is like this incredible movement with the youth. My daughter is one of the board members for Wild Bearies, and she was able to go to Dream of Wild Health this past year and learn about seeds, and it's incredible to see the young people in the next generation really focusing on that and reclaiming some of those traditional growing practices and the space that we have. So there are some of these things like the Three Sisters that are a little universal, although the stories that on how they came to us might vary with tribes. There's no denying that they grow beautifully together and they complement each other, and it's wonderful when you add them together in a meal. And that's one of the things that I like to talk about, is that some of these flavors just naturally go together. You know, like the cedar or the ramps, which we'll be using a little bit with our bison. They're all from the woods, and they're so like earthy but vibrant. I don't know, they grow together naturally and they exist naturally, so of course they're going to complement each other when you eat them. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to get this continuing here and let that go for a minute. And I'll show you, because we've been talking about this bison. We'll get to it, I promise. While this is starting to go, I'm going to cut these squash open. And acorn squash is so accessible, but it's absolutely delicious. And it's very versatile. Like, you can make it sweet or savory. Today we're roasting it with some maple, but you can also stuff it with sausage or rice. I mean, there's so many things that you can do with an acorn squash. I know the recipe called for delicata, and if you haven't had one before, you should try it. They're so delicious, and they're perfectly sized. If you cut it in half for one person to have a half. I mean, I always want the whole one, but I think it's okay to share for most people.
I feel like my mom would mostly just olive oil them and put them maybe cut side down and roast them like that.
Yeah, I'm just gonna scoop these seeds out, and I'm not saving these seeds because I don't know where they came from or growing, but that's one of the things, like if we were to be using an ancestral squash, we would very meticulously take out these seeds and care for them and make sure that they were dried after this. And there's a lot of thought and mindfulness that goes into our foods. I think in any cultural food that kind of connects you to a home space or a particular feeling, like a comfort food, you can't help but be a little bit more mindful and intentful when you're cooking, and then when you're consuming, and it just makes you happy. You know, I'm sure everybody has these memories of being in a kitchen with their mom or their grandma, and it's very sensical, and it can bring you to those spaces when you recreate these meals. That's the way I feel when I smell some of these things. Like, I didn't use it in this, but I brought some sweetgrass, and I'm not sure if everybody has seen this, but it is something that we have in the area. And it is just another wonderful component that nature gave us that perfectly complements food. And you can use it, you know, we make tea out of it or in a marinade. I've brined turkey with it. It's just an all-around great thing. And it's absolutely delicious. So for this one, I'm just going to put these in the pan. I'm still trying to turn up this induction burner. Sorry, guys. I haven't used this one before, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's not very sensitive, so I have to.
I really struggled with it last time.
Yeah.
Oh, this is Juniper. Okay.
It's getting there, I think.
Yeah, it was just hard to adjust.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, like what you were saying, I'm just going to add a little bit of oil to the inside of these and get them coated a little bit. And then also some of this maple syrup. I mean, I always suggest if you can buy pure maple syrup, you should do it. It's so different from something that might be mixed with, say, corn syrup or another sweetener and just maple flavored, the pure maple syrup is incredible. We use it on everything. We have maple sugar, we have maple syrup, we have maple candy. I mean, it's everything that we do. Maple is such an incredible flavor. And then I'm just also going to add a little bit of pie spice. I get this from Penzies, but it's a perfect combination of everything that you would imagine a pie spice would need in it. Smells so good already. I'm going to put this in the oven at 350. Look.
Oh my goodness.
All these gadgets. I've always loved working on an open fire, and so sometimes I'm like, where am I and what am I doing in this kitchen? But something is working because my meat is starting to brown and my onions are starting to sweat a little bit, and that's what I want. All right, so I'm going to move these beans out of the way until that's ready a little bit more.
I think I have a comment. Maybe I'll read it from Wally. He said, thanks for organizing Elena and the Cap Times team. He's wondering if we could talk about the deep connection that the bison has to indigenous communities and the ways we can decolonize our food systems with recipes like tonight's demo.
Yeah, decolonizing our food systems. I mean, I'm blessed to be able to work with my good friend Sean Sherman, who does a lot of work with decolonizing menus. And it's something that I think we definitely need to move towards, especially with the health issues that we have nowadays. Our bodies just weren't meant to consume the way that we do, and the white flour or the red meat's the same, like beef, even chicken is something that wasn't on our diet pre-colonial time. Mm-hmm. So when you say decolonize, you're talking about removing those aspects from your diet. And I always have to say kudos to people that can do it, because I am a single mom and it's not something that I can do, admittedly, but I really focus on incorporating these flavors. About 4 years ago, we started saying 1 meal a week we're going to add an indigenous ingredient. And over the course of time, it's now where we eat this regularly, and it's like, okay, maybe once a month we'll go through a drive-through instead, and I can just even feel the difference, although it definitely is a long road to be able to be like, I don't know that I'll ever be decolonized, but it's something that we really need to think about and to concentrate on. And like you had mentioned, Lindsay, it's not fast work. It's something that there's a lot of intimidation, there's accessibility issues, even financially. Like bison is absolutely delicious, and it is a spiritual food for me, especially. It brings me back to these memories of being with my family in South Dakota and, you know, having this meat and this animal kind of tribute itself while we're in ceremonies. And it's connecting on different levels, and some people don't know that bison did exist in our region here in Wisconsin before. And I think going back to that, and it's again being mindful about what you consume and where your food is sourced from, and just knowing those things, it makes us realize that we have shifted so much. And you know, it brings up the topic of food as medicine, which is kind of a hot topic right now, and I understand it. And there are a lot of medicinal properties to our food, especially indigenous food that comes from the land. But for me, what I was taught is that medicine is in the preparation, or however it pertains to me. Like, I'm a processor, I'm a butcher, and I love being around meat, and for me it's, honoring those animals correctly and being mindful and prayers and having a good mindset when you're in the kitchen even, or when you're handling those foods. And it might not always be the day for you to be in the kitchen, and some days I'm not. Some days I'm just ready to eat, and that's where the medicine is for me, is in sharing that meal. But it's going out into the woods and foraging these beautiful ingredients and appreciating the space that they come from, or being in the garden and cultivating. That's the part for me that I feel is medicinal and kind of connecting us. And because our ancestors retained this knowledge and knew the importance of it, is why we have it today and why we still have some of these ingredients. And so what can I do in this moment to ensure that my grandchildren will continue to be able to have these things? And part of it is eating them and sharing these meals and having them be familiar with the flavors and where to find the foods and how to cook them and prepare them. And so it's very holistic to me, and I don't think that you can really take one component and focus on it, but it's the end result is this beautiful meal that hopefully one day, you'll be able to look back and say, like, I had that meal and I remember. And maybe when you see a cedar tree, you might look at it a little differently.
That was lovely, thank you.
Yeah, so talking about bison, I have a local butcher that's my friend, and they cut roast for me. Sometimes it's a little hard to find, but you can always order it to be shipped home to your home, which is what I did during the pandemic. I don't even want to admit, I bought an eighth of a bison, which was a huge amount of meat when it showed up to my house. And it lasted us a really long time, and it was pretty economical when I thought of it, all the different cuts that they sent me. The roasts are not always the same as what a beef would be, because it's just so much bigger. If you were to have the same cut of meat from a bison, it just would be, exponentially larger than something that came from a cow. So it's not always consistent, and it's not always the same cut that you get. But a bison roast, like this one, which has been marinating, so I cannot tell you how much, it smells incredible. I put ramps and cedar on it with some sunflower oil and onion, and you can kind of see how it is that I want to clean it up a little bit more. The more of the silver skin that you have or you leave on when you get it ready to be cooked, the tighter it'll be, and it kind of keeps it restricted a little bit. So I want to get those pieces off. Some of this I can leave on here, I know that this whole part is wrapped in that, and treating it, I think in the recipe we said that we would slow cook it, but when we talked, Lindsay, and we were saying, oh yeah, we could totally use a pressure cooker on that and save a lot of time. That's what I did today. So I wanted to show you this piece just so you could see how beautiful it was being marinated, and know that you have to sometimes, take some of this off of there that might be on it, just because we don't know exactly, the cut. They're mostly labeled bison roast, and it's not like an eye roast or, a particular cut. It's just a piece of this that goes off. Here's just one small piece that I want to make sure I remove.
Is it in general less fatty than beef?
It absolutely is, yes. So, well, I can kind of show you too. There isn't much marbling in this meat at all. Yeah. So we want to add a little bit. Naturally, and what my favorite fat to add is rendered duck fat, because it's perfectly flavors it, and it doesn't take away from the taste. But you could use a mild oil like olive oil or sunflower oil, which is what I usually use at home, especially if I don't have any fresh rendered duck fat laying around, which most of the time I do. But it's one of those things that you also have to, I think nowadays you can get it in the store more. I think
Yeah.
I've seen it in a jar on the shelf, so I wanted to make sure that you guys could see what this looked like before I put it in the cooker. And on a pressure cooker, this is a, I believe, 3.5 pound roast or so. I would probably cook this for an hour under pressure and then let it just kind of slowly cool down from there to make sure that it was shreddable, which is what we want for this recipe. So this is going, it's just not going very fast. No, it's almost there. And I do want some of the fat from this bison to go into the beans and to flavor it a little bit. So it will continue cooking in the oven a little bit more, but I don't want to leave giant chunks in there. I kind of want it to blend in and have it be the same kind of size bite as the bean. Although I definitely want it to be noticeable. And let me switch these out. And I'll chop up a little bit of the cedar that I'm going to put in there also.
Does it matter if it's like younger cedar or an older tree? Like, is there a difference in texture or strength of flavor?
Even if it was an older tree where you would end up reaching, it would still be like,
Oh,
I
yeah.
would imagine like an older tree would have the bigger, stronger, maybe more bold branches up higher. I think that it doesn't make too much of a difference. You just want to make sure that if you're foraging and you're harvesting something like this, that it's in a space that isn't chemically treated. And sometimes you're not aware of that. Like we actually have some land that we know is a little bit more removed and nobody goes on there, and there's some beautiful cedar trees there that we use. And I know that they're good, but not always are you able to make sure that it isn't affected by something like a pesticide or herbicide, which you don't want to consume. So anytime you're out foraging, make sure you know the space and make sure you know that it's a safe place to get something for food. So yeah, I just chopped it up roughly and you can see there. And I'm just going to sprinkle this in with my bison. So I know another thing that I had talked about were ramps, and I used it in the bison marinade. The flavor is similar to an onion. What I do is go and harvest them in the spring, and I love ramps because they're one of the first things that come out, and it's kind of like, we're here and spring is here and we're ready to show up. And so they're really just like these wild leeks, and we only harvest the green very rarely, and it's when a space might need to be trimmed back a little bit will I harvest the bulb part of it, just to make sure that the space will continue growing the same way. You need to leave that bulb behind. But in drying them, we just put them in the dehydrator, and really it's overnight and they're completely dry, and they last for years like this. And like with any other kind of dried seasoning or herb, you want it when you wake it, if you rub it in your hands a little bit and warm it up, then those oils get released a little bit and the flavor turns incredible and it kind of wakes it back up again. People make pesto out of ramps, and I think I've made pasta out of them a couple times. They're just delicious. It's one of the natural seasonings that are incredible. But again, with foraging, it's wonderful to get things off of the earth, and I love it and I support it. I really feel like all of us need to be a little bit more mindful of our role as stewards of this land and respecting the space that we live in. But in respecting the space, we need to make sure that we don't over-harvest and that we always leave enough, and that there will be bulbs in the ground for next year's harvest, or if we go and take some, that we make sure that there's enough for other things that rely on those plants. I know that milkweed is one of them that we use quite a bit, and but so do the monarch butterflies and other pollinators, and so we use it very sparingly. It's one of those delicacies that we get in the spring, and so the same is true with ramps or cedar or anything. If you use it, you just use a very small amount, and you make sure that you diversify the area that you forage in so that you don't over-harvest. Overdoing anything isn't good.
Elena, I just want to say, I'm sure I speak for everyone when we could listen to you talk all day, because this has been so beautiful. So thank you so much for being here. Wally, who asked that question earlier, he said, Elena, I just wanted to share this with you because I don't know if you'll see the comments. He said, Elena, beautiful answer and such a great note about accessibility and knowing the deeper stories to the food we eat. So I just wanted to share that.
Yes, thank you, Wally.
Wally.
Yay. Okay, so I just added a little bit of the maple syrup and the bison to the beans with the onions and garlic, and it smells incredible with cedar and ramps. And we really just want to complement the flavor of the beans. We don't want the maple to take over, which it can. So we want to add that pretty sparingly when we add it to our beans. But we do want it to complement it. So we want to be able to taste it. It's not a huge amount that we add. And for this one, I believe that we will add just a little bit of salt because the beans are for the most part ready, and I'm just going to add a tiny little bit of water extra to make sure that they have what they need to be tender enough for a baked bean. So just 1 second. And that's just about 1.5 cups for this.
It's water. Yeah.
And I'm going to put this in the oven with the squash.
I feel like if I was actually in a kitchen with that, it would make me crazy. It's like my car beeps every time you open the door.
Yeah,
Like
it
you didn't know
definitely
you
lets
opened
you
the door.
It's like when you don't click your seatbelt, like in your
Yeah.
car. That's what that is.
Yeah.
I didn't know we needed this, but I guess if it's kicking out a lot of heat, I don't know.
All right. So I'm just going to take a quick look at my list to make sure that we have everything going. So with that bison roast, some pointers for you, especially because it is such a lean cut of meat. You want to sear it in a really hot pan on all sides before you put it in your pressure cooker or your crock pot, because that just kind of helps seal in what juice it does have. And then go ahead and put it in and let it sit and rest after it's done cooking. Adding a little bit of fat to it will definitely help it out a little, but it is a very lean piece of meat and it can dry out quickly. So doing some of those extra steps like the marinating and then the hard sear before you put it in helps make sure that what juice it does have and what fat it does have stays in that piece of meat as much as possible. All right. So I'm just going to warm this pan up here, hopefully. Hopefully I'll figure it out. And the arepa dough is ready. So it's just kind of rested. It's absorbed all that water in, and the corn has kind of bloomed. And you can see, it's almost like a Play-Doh texture here.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really smooth. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful dough, and especially with people who have gluten allergies or issues with having, wheat flour, it's an incredibly delicious alternative, and it's the way we traditionally ate something like a bread. Although this did come from South America, we have been using it for quite some time, and it just helps exemplify the relationship in the trading that happened, centuries ago between indigenous people of the Americas, because we have, different kinds of corn and different kinds of corn bread throughout the Americas, and they're all kind of related. So I love it, and I love using them. And it's a delicious sandwich. I can't wait. Just gonna put some oil in this pan.
Is that sunflower oil?
Go ahead, Lindsay.
What kind of oil is it?
So this is just olive oil that I'm putting in here. And I don't want this to be too thick. I did put a note in the recipe that if you want to make it a sandwich, you might make it a little thicker and then sear it on both sides and let it rest, cut it in half and put it in the oven. But for this one, I think I'm just going to make like a larger, thinner one so that you can see and we can place the bison on top of it. Make sure that that's going to be hot enough. So I'll just make a couple of these so you can see. And I want to be mindful of the time. How much? I don't have.
Oh, you're fine.
We've got about,
Am I good on time? Okay.
yeah.
I was gonna say Janina's watching, and she said, "I'm getting hungry for arepas."
Oh my gosh, you should. I am too. I can't wait. It's done. They're incredible, and there's a lot of places that you can get them around town.
Lasagara.
But making them on your own, there's no substitute for it. And
Do you have a favorite place around town?
not around town here.
Yeah, okay. I was like, I'm gonna try to make these, but I'm always curious.
Yeah, I don't know. I know there's a couple places, and I know that my sous chef Yusuf Binrella, who some of you may know.
That sounds familiar. That name.
Yeah, we've made these a lot, and we were just talking about it the other night. And one of the first times that we cooked together, he had this mega-sized bowl of arepa dough, and he was like, "I need help." And so that was like the first time we were in the kitchen together was me making arepas for his breakfast dish. So you can really transform these any way that you'd like. They don't have to always be savory. We used them for breakfast with a sweet corn mush, and they were incredible. So let me see, to make sure that that's going to be hot enough to sear it, almost. But I do want to get a nice sear on here. If you've had arepas before, it's like a crispy, delicious corn chip if you get the sear on it correct. So I want to make sure that if I can, I do that and show you.
So I did this demo with Suhei with the arepas, and my arepas were very bad. But I tried it, and I had a lot of fun, and we made all these fillings, and I was just like eating my fillings while I was waiting for the arepas to finish, I guess. And my husband and we ate them, but I really need to try it again and to get the consistency better.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things. It's really simple, but I think if you add too much or you overthink it, it gets to be a little bit confusing. But I always like to advocate for using, the most purest, simple form and really letting the ingredients shine and appreciating the flavors that nature just gave us, without too much extras on there. So maybe you were just too fancy, Lindsay.
I do overthink all the time.
All right, so it's kind of sizzling here. You can hear it. Excited. I'm just going to rinse my hands really quick.
I just can't hear it a little bit.
So of course with these sandwiches, you can always do whatever you'd like to enhance it. Sometimes you might want to use like a balsamic reduction, drizzle on top just to highlight the flavor of the meat, or maybe some arugula to give it a fresh, peppery pop. It's a sandwich ultimately, and we're going to do these open faced because they're a little bit larger, but you can make them smaller and cut them in half and really actually eat it like a sandwich. And I think the sky's the limit when it comes to toppings. Just like any sandwich artist would say, that there's a lot that you can do. While this one is going, I am going to show you the bison that I put in the slow cooker earlier, so that we have a little bit to try.
Cooking show magic.
Yes, cooking show magic. Let me see. Zoe, can you get me another hotel from them? So because I traveled from Wisconsin Dells to Madison, I did just actually put this in my slow cooker and I let it go for an hour, and then I unplugged it without depressurizing it and put it in my car and let it come here. And then when it came here, I just had it on low to keep it warm. And it's like perfectly shreddable. Here. You can kind of see the recipe calls for just a couple tablespoons of cornmeal, and that helps the gravy. I love using cornmeal as a substitute for flour with gravy, because it does bloom up and it thickens the same way, but you don't have to add everything that you would for a roux and let it kind of develop. You can just add that cornmeal in and whisk it in, and then it's like this perfectly thickened gravy. So with the drippings, that's definitely something that you could do. Let me see. I know.
We've got the dog on.
There's a, yeah. Super excited.
Good TV. Let's see here.
It smells so good that Coach came to visit and to see what was going on over here. Thank you. All right, so I'm just going to pull this out and put it in here so you can see what I have. And it is the same, it's almost the complementary spot to the roast that I showed you earlier. And it is just super tender. And looks incredible. And I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's shredding really, really well. So it's got an incredible color, and it definitely got super tender in the slow cooker, if you can see that.
So the Montreal steak seasoning that you use for the marinade, that has some salt in it, onions, other flavorings in there?
Yeah. So it's got like garlic and pepper, and it's one of my favorite seasonings because it's a little bit chunkier, and it's really like the perfect combination in my mind for a red meat. You definitely could use like Chicago steak seasoning and adjust it based on your taste. It is similar. It is still a red meat. And so anything that you would use for red meat, like I said, if you wanted to use a balsamic reduction or some fresh greens on top of this, definitely go for it. That's one of the things that I love, supporting is making it your own and adding the flavors that you're familiar with, because that's going to be more chance of you appreciating it and continuing to eat this way instead of always saying like follow this flavor profile or the way that I'm doing it, because I think all of our palates are a little bit different. So if you're making this at home, see what works for you and use those flavors. But I do like the Montreal steak seasoning the most. I always have this like in my car, this gigantic one. So definitely like it. All right, so the arepa is starting to get a nice crust on it. I'm just gonna let it sit for another minute here on that side, and then I'll flip it. And
Are you waiting for coloration?
yeah, I wanted to kind of seal it a little bit to get a nice sear on there. I just still haven't quite figured out how to increase the heat on this induction burner fast. It's like a very slow process, which is safe, but I just don't. It's a little different than what I'm used to.
Questions. What audience questions do we have?
Yeah, what questions can I answer while I'm waiting for this to warm up a little bit?
We do.
Oh, there we go.
We did a last call for the Owl's Brew drawing. If anybody missed that, it's in the chat. That link.
So the squash blossoms that you put into the arepa, are they ground or did you just sort of crumble them?
Yeah, they are. So they're dried and they just naturally kind of fall apart. You can see that there's settling in this bag. So some of them are a little bit larger, and I'll use these for garnish on the dish because they do have this incredible flavor and this beautiful color that kind of makes everything pop, and you realize that, oh my gosh, that's a flower. And it's another great way to honor a squash. The blossoms, especially the male ones that Sakari uses for the dried squash blossoms, they're good stuffed. Like we like to stuff them with cheese and roll them in cornmeal and then fry them in a pan. They're so good. There's just so much deliciousness that comes out of the garden in any form, like if it's the leaves and the greenage or if it's the actual squash or the flowers. I mean, it's all edible and it's all delicious.
You can bake arepas too, right?
Yes.
All right.
Now it's too hot. I'm switching it out because the thing just completely stuck to it. Let me see here. See, not everything always works out the way you hope, but
I don't know. I kind of feel better knowing the induction burner is universally
it's like, a hard thing.
Yeah.
Oh, no, of course, that one's too small.
A larger pan.
Yeah, I need one with this bottom on it. If I can.
Are there some above the oven?
They're the same little ones.
Oh, sure.
I was looking above that fire burning oven.
Sometimes
Run.
these work and sometimes they don't. It's working this time, so we'll just switch out to this guy.
Back there. Can we just shop like a chef and pull one off the Kessenich shelves here? I didn't have any luck back there. How's it going?
This one's okay. This one
one's
will
okay?
work. Yeah. I'm gonna need a metal spatula though, because that rubber one just gave up. All right. This time for real.
Oh, we have a question.
Yes.
Janina asks, can you do arepas in the oven too, like heating the pan in the oven first?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yes,
on the
you
oven
can.
maybe too?
You definitely can. And you're going to have a different result. One of the reasons why I like frying them in the oil is because it does give you that really crisp texture. And it, again, just like with the meat, it kind of seals in that moisture, which is what you want. You don't want it to be like a real dry corn cracker. You want it to be like a similar to a bread. So, did you guys hear that?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a good sizzle. That's perfect.
It's fast.
I'm just going to peek in on these things here. Oh my gosh, looks incredible. So almost, we just need to wait for this guy. I'm not sure if you can see that or not, but it's got a nice little spot on it now. Right. So I am going to take those out because the squash looks done.
Buckle up.
And
Marcia was watching and they said, thank you so much. They're looking to try to make the recipe and they wish they could have stayed longer, but they hung out with us. So thank you, Marcia.
yes. All right. So here we are, and we can get ready to plate it. Move this out of the way here. Okay, so I have a little bit of my bison here that has been shredded. Ready? We have our arepa, which looks, I'm just going to give it one more second while I grab some of this other stuff behind me. I don't know if you can see these beans, but they look incredible.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of sweet and savory in this meal today.
Yes.
Like the interplay between the two.
I love the way it complements each other. You don't have too much of one flavor that way. And you really are able to let it shine. Make sure this is nice and golden here. And you can see it's got this nice crust on it. It's incredible. And I'm just going to kind of lay this on top here.
Hinkley Productions coming in with the money shot at the end with that plate. It looks so good.
And
It's like, I know I'm right here, but looking at the screen, I'm like, that's pretty.
and then I'm just going to add a little bit of the squash blossom to it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So it's my perfect version of like a summer cookout. You could grill the squash, of course, if you'd like to. I always like having a little pool of moisture there because that gives somebody the chance to kind of scrape it together and mix it all up so it's this wonderful bite. If you'd like, you could add a little bit of the finishing salt, which kind of ties it all together when you have the cedar salt, and it just gives it a little kiss of flavor at the end. But like I said, if you'd like, you could have some arugula or something on top of your sandwich. But there we go.
Wow.
So beautiful. Thank you.
Yes. I wish you all were here to share this with me. Hopefully one day we'll be able to have a meal in person together, in the near future, hopefully, and everybody is staying safe. And I appreciate, the adjustments that are made to make sure that everybody is safe. So thank you for doing that, and for inviting me to the table.
Yes, thank you for your flexibility and for your work. This is just beautiful, and I'm gonna come by and pick it up in a to-go box so I can taste it.
Yay!
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
I can come in, and I just want to wrap it up by thanking our sponsors one more time. Of course, Sitka Salmon Shares, our presenting sponsor, Kessenich, where we are tonight, our official kitchen sponsor, and Owl's Brew. Congrats to those winners. We're going to email you. And thanks to them for being our beverage sponsor. Thank you so much, Chef and Lindsay. This was amazing, and it looks and smells so good in here. We had a couple really beautiful comments too, praising how beautiful it looked from the viewers. And one of our reporters, Natalie, was watching as well. So that was really cool. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for watching.